Dad always used to say the only causes worth fighting for were the lost causes.
The Senator yield. No, sir, I will not yield.
Government is not the solution to our problem. Government is the problem.
You're listening to a Pyrolitical Pyrocast.
And welcome to the Pyrocast presented by Pyrolitical Radio Show. Hey everyone, I'm Thomas.
And I'm Randall.
We've got some great topics for you tonight, a little bit of philosophy mixed with some drugs. It's going to be amazing. Randall, give us a breakdown.
Do we get them both together?
You know, I've heard people think pretty deeply when they're high or whatever, so.
Maybe so, maybe so. Well, we're going to talk a little bit. Here we are on the heels of the latest celebration of independence in the United States of America. So I think we'll spend a little bit of time talking about why they did that, what that means, and are we still? Is that good enough? And then we'll talk about some drugs, specifically weed.
We will. We'll talk about some drugs, and we will tie that into liberty because...
Liberté.
Well, before we get into this, we want to tell you again, thanks for listening in. If you could go over to our YouTube channel, Pyrolitical Live, and subscribe, and even hit the bell if you really want to know when we're on. Ding! Awesomeness. Ding! I mean, you know, we can't help it. So anyway, we heard that Nevada finally, quote-unquote, legalized marijuana completely, even recreational. So we're probably going to hit on that a little bit. But before we do that, I want to talk about liberty because I feel like liberty is messy.
You think so?
Don't you?
Maybe just a little bit.
Well, Thomas Jefferson had a great quote about it, and he said that he would rather be exposed to the inconveniences attending too much liberty than to those attending too small a degree of it. So this was a realistic appreciation that when people are free, they're going to trample on each other's liberties, whether government's there or not. They're going to do things that upset each other. They're going to rob. They're going to, hurt, kill, murder, everything.
Whatever.
So he's saying you have a choice. You either have government's just a little bit involved in your life or it's up to complete communism. It's your choice. It's going to be inconvenience either way.
Yeah, people are going to inconvenience one another because that's just what they do, unfortunately. When we make choices, we don't always see all the consequences of those choices. We are imperfect, and that's what happens. And so at the end of the day, we end up making choices that run over other people's, agency or choices or livelihoods or whatever. And it's messy. It's definitely messy. But I like that Thomas Jefferson said that. He's, even though it's messy, it's better than having someone dictating what's going on and, forcing things to happen one way or another. It's so much better. So
yeah, it is.
Go ahead.
Oh, I was going to say, let's think about it. In liberty, Jefferson had slaves, okay, in freedom. He had the right to import slaves. And so here he's talking about how inconvenient liberty can be, and yet he completely inconvenienced some people's lives. And I also find it interesting he panned or was inspired to write all men are created equal, and yet at the same time that he had slaves. And so obviously humans are going to have flaws and they're going to have contradictions. Thankfully in the U.S. we're advanced above that. But the point is it's going to be messy and inconvenient. And so I think Washington also called taxes inconvenient, necessarily inconvenient. So your life's going to suck no matter what you do. Just kidding. We're not that negative. But yeah, you're going to have some hard things. And you just kind of have to determine where you want the suck to come from. Freedom and just ordinary life or government.
Right.
Choose your suck.
Because
okay?
government, as we constantly point out on this show, on on the Pyrocast. It's not some benevolent entity which seeks to, do good to all. Whenever it attempts to do good, it is harming others, and sometimes blatantly. But just like we were saying, you as an individual, we can't see everyone that we may trample upon in the choice where our decisions lead us, and definitely government can't see that, because you and I, when we make a choice, it's voluntary, right? We're not forcing people to go along with our decisions. I mean, I would hope we're not. That could happen from time to time with individuals, but for the most part, it's not an act of force on others. Right. But when government makes that decision or that determination, it is an act of force on someone. Either they're forcing you to do good, or they're forcing you to comply, or they're forcing you to do whatever. So in their benevolence or their attitude of benevolence, they can run roughshod right over the top of innocent individuals who may be earning a livelihood, maybe, blessing others' lives, and this, general law ends up destroying everything they have, whether it was intended or not. Government is just not benevolent.
Yeah, and that's the thing. We as humans are programmed to want to avoid pain. Work is pain. Pain is pain. All kinds of things are painful in our lives. And so as humans, we have the fight or flight mechanism. And when we can't fly away from government, then we tend to use that to take from others. Like there are mothers, single mothers specifically, that have been on government welfare their whole lives. And there's been families that intergenerationally they've been on it. I've heard so far as 3 to 4 generations. And it's like, well, yeah, if the benefit's there and that's how you grew up, why wouldn't you take the benefit? It's just that humans are programmed as Bastia to avoid pain. And where pain is easier than labor, where taking is easier than labor, that's what you're going to do. Right. If you're not enlightened.
So,
like Randall.
So in light of that discussion, what then drove our founding fathers to decide for liberté instead of just continuing on with the rest of jolly old England? What caused them to say, you know what, I'm willing to risk my life, liberty, and property, and my good name, my character, to risk it all, sign on the bottom line, and declare independence? No one has given us authority to do this, but we're doing it anyway.
Well, you have authority. You have authority from God as his child to establish your sovereignty. I know that's the S word, and that these, intelligence agencies, they labeled them sovereign citizens, and then the citizens call them that themselves. But as we've talked about in other broadcasts, like Helmuth Hubner, which was a Mormon who lived during World War II, he created an underground where they would listen to the Allied radio and then spread the news amongst the German citizens, and he was ultimately beheaded. He didn't have authority to go against his own church or against the government. He just took it because he said, we're children of God and we must stand against evil. And the one thing that the Gestapo said when they killed him in his trial, they said he mixes theology with his doctrines or with his politics, and therefore they couldn't have that, because if they had that, if you have a theology tied to your politics, good luck getting that away from that person. If you're in government, you cannot take that away. I mean, Christians have been martyred and destroyed for millennia, multiple millennia. It's just like millennial alias. How do you say multiple millennia?
I'm not sure.
That was really bad.
Millennia, anyway, beyond end, or whatever. Okay, never mind. Moving on.
Millenniae. But the point is, Christians have been sacrificed, and other groups throughout history. Speaking of Mormons, they had to leave the United States because they want to assert their religious and freedom of speech and religious rights and all that. So government can't do much with the people that are whose God is God. You know what I mean?
So you're saying that this group of individuals back in 1776 sat down together without authority to do it, but then said, you know what? We've talked about it. we've discussed it, we've debated it. We're declaring ourselves a free and independent state. And who cares what the king thinks? We're sick and tired of him doing whatever the heck he wants because he's just running roughshod over us. So we're just going to do it.
Well, I'm trying to think of a quote that I believe is in 1761. Patrick Henry gave that famous speech, which we've had, come down to us as the treason speech. But give me liberty or give me death. But in that speech, he lambasted the king and talked about how awful monarchy is. And he said as part of the speech, and at least that's those who listened remember, he said, if this is treason, have at it. And he was basically saying, I would rather die than not be free. And if this is treason against the king who pretends to be the representative for God, he's deity on earth, then have at me. He doesn't care. So
come
that's
at me,
the point.
bro.
Come at me, bro. In fact, it says that at one of the points, he was interrupted by cries of treason from delegates who easily recognized the reference to assassinated leaders. And he said, anyway, may profit by their example. If this be treason, make the most of it. He later apologized to the assembly and expressed his loyalty to the king. Nevertheless, the cat was out of the bag, proverbially speaking. It was too late.
How often does that happen in politics, where you have one person that says one thing and then later they kind of retract it? Maybe went a little overboard on that one. I think it happens fairly frequently. But regardless, that's that same spirit, and that was brewing in the Americas for a long time. They felt this great distance between themselves and Mother England, and they felt this taxation without representation, which is the famous line, and so they had these little things build up over time, these abridged liberties. And then eventually this group of individuals got together and said, you know what? We've had it. It's too much to be borne. And I think it's interesting. You watch or read about John Adams and his experience before this. Right. And he was the lawyer that defended the redcoats who shot into the mob at the Boston Massacre.
Yeah.
His goal was to show the English that the rule of law existed and reigned, and somebody would be represented just as well in the Americas as they would be in England, and try and help them see that the English colonies, which were the American colonies, weren't right. Some rabble. They weren't, being crazy. He defended them and he got him off. And a lot of people didn't like him for that. But then here he goes, not long later, after he's gone through this whole rigmarole. He was even up for the position of, what was it, head barrister or whatever. He would have been like the top attorney in the colony, the king's man. But he turned it down because he was so upset with what he saw the king do after he had done all these things to try and show how much the colonies wanted to follow them. And so then he comes to this Continental Congress, and they're like, and he was one of the major voices, this cannot stand. This is gone too far. There is no working with this man because he doesn't want to be worked with. Let's go. Come on. Let's make this happen.
Absolutely. Well, the one thing too, Randall, as I was thinking about it, you talked about authority, and you don't have to have any authority. You already have it from God to assert your liberties. A little bit more about Patrick Henry in the Liberty or Death speech. He was 29 when he made that speech, and he had submitted several acts or acts to the Parliament. He wanted to get these passed because it would defend the rights of American colonists. And he had things about declaring Virginia citizens' rights in the Royal Charter. He also said that people should be free to choose their representatives and only be placed with taxes on their colonial assemblies, which really raised eyebrows. And that's when he said, well, Caesar had his Brutus, Charles the First had his Cromwell, and George the Third, and that's when people shot him down. But anyway, so he had a great statement about the corruptness of monarchy, and he was willing to lose his seat in Parliament over that. The other thing, too, that I found interesting was that Helmut Hübner said this, and he was 16 or 17 when he said it. He says, do you know the country without freedom, the country of terror and tyranny? Yes, you know it well, but you're afraid to talk about it. They have intimidated you to such an extent that you don't dare talk for fear of reprisals, like being guillotined, like he was. Yes, you are right. It is Germany, Hitler Germany. Through their unscrupulous terror tactics against young and old, men and women, they have succeeded in making you spineless puppets to do their bidding. Now, if more citizens had felt that way about liberty, as they did with, as John Adams did and as Patrick Henry did, they may have been able to stop it. But the problem is, when we get in fear, we go in the fight or flight mode. And obviously Germans were in flight mode. You've talked about, Randall, the book, They Thought They Were Free, and the incremental dissolving of liberty by government over time. And the reason is government has all the time in the world. Another election, taxation that never ends, bureaucracy. So they are paid by us to form our own noose. And they have all the time, and they can just pass an act here or an act there, and before long, it's the proverbial frog in the boiling pot. I would say it's more like insert a good analogy. Anyway, because I've heard that sometimes frogs will actually jump out, but usually they won't. And the point is, we just kind of go along, and the good people kind of get worn out or distracted. And before you know it, you have tyranny. You have Hitler Germany.
Yeah, but it could never happen here, right? It could never
happen here. It already has.
It could never happen here, Thomas.
I said it already has. I got in a debate about public lands with someone yesterday on social media, and they're arguing for the feds. They said, what about the supremacy clause? And I said, enjoy your pen. That wasn't very articulate or a very good argument. I'm saying your human cattle pen that they've created through surveillance, enjoy it. It's the most luxurious pen that have been created for us human cattle in the history of mankind, probably. The quality of living inside the pen is very nice. You can have a house and a car, and you can even have a business. But ultimately, you're either going to go to the trough or you're going to lose the stuff. You're going to say, I will give my sacred honor and our treasure and everything else for liberty. And you're going to risk it. And many of the people in the founding generation, men and women, did lose everything, including their lives. And guess what? They're happy in the kingdom of God now. And they're like, worth it. What the heck are you doing down there?
Yeah, don't give it up so easily.
Amen. Thanks, Randall. Can I get an amen?
Amen. Yeah. No, but that was totally it. I mean, here we have these people. So we celebrate. I had the opportunity to have a barbecue with our family, and then afterwards we had a fireworks display in the neighborhood, and all the local communities, they're all shooting up all these fireworks. And I just thought, there was this one spot, one of the fireworks that was going off was shooting off all these rockets, just one after another. It was pretty amazing for one done in a cul-de-sac. That I just started singing, and the rockets, red glare, the bombs bursting, and I was really feeling it, but nobody else, the rest of the group was silent, and I was just thinking, what is the 4th of July all about for people? Is it a celebration of this act of revolution, this revolutionary act from 1776, or is it an opportunity for us to sit back and blow things up and eat bratwurst, which is German, or hot dogs and hamburgers? I mean, what is it to us? I think every American realizes it has something to do with government, or at least there's a flag involved. But how many of us really understand the sacrifice that went into that? How many of us really believe that it was necessary on the first hand, and then secondly, believe that it's been worth it and think that it still exists. At least in the sense that the founders said. I mean, it was beautiful. It was an amazing display. I really enjoyed it. But I really questioned everyone else that was there. What were they thinking about? Were they grateful for what they are blessed with? Or were they just thinking about, wow, that's a really cool firework. I need to get me one of those. You know what I mean?
I think that's such a good point. It reminds me of last Saturday. I went up to northern Utah and I went to the Stadium of Fire. And Stadium of Fire is this annual celebration right around the 4th where Lavelle Edwards Stadium fills with 60,000 people. It's a football stadium in Provo, Utah. And they have this big fireworks show and extravaganza with artists like Brian Regan performed. I got to say, he needs some new jokes, though. I was a little disappointed on that. But anyway, he was funny because fireworks kept going off and he kept getting thrown off. So he kept making fun of that. It was awesome. Little Big Town performed, and this some Hawes kid, he's 25 anyway. The girls love him. I would too. He's so handsome. But the point is, after they have the concert section, then they had a guy fire out of a cannon, and then they have this amazing fireworks display, and then they have F-14 jets or F-16 jets fly over. They do this big giant flag thing. So, it's the ultimate consummate American display. And I felt the same way, Randall, because at the beginning they have anyone who's served in the military stand up. And so, veterans, I'm from the National Guard, or I was. And so, but I had that feeling. I'm like, it is so easy to be patriotic. It's so easy to be nationalistic and patriotic. But what about the difference between patriotism and being a free man? A free man or woman is different than patriotism because any damn fool can be patriotic. There were plenty of people in the Japanese Empire and in Rome and in Germany that were patriotic, loved their country, fought for the Fuhrer. But there was not that feeling or understanding of being a free man, a sovereign, a child of God.
It's a totally different thing. It's versus being an independent versus feeling like you're part of the whole, the nation, the conglomerate, the part of the social order. And how often do we even think about it, much less, try and articulate it or share it with people or really act on it? How often are we free, truly free, mentally, physically, spiritually? I mean, are we free, or are we bound down? Do we bind ourselves down? I mean, there's so many ways, but you're right. I mean, so many of us go through our daily life and we don't even think about. I mean, we enjoy the benefits of freedom and liberty without really understanding what they are, what they mean, and how they impact us directly. And without that, I mean, we can't go long, I don't think, as a nation that's truly free and independent. I mean, if we are still, how long will that last if nobody understands what it means to be free and independent? Right. Not very long. Because, as you've pointed out, there are forces at work back in Washington, D.C., Washington, D.C. and our state houses and our cities that for ill or good, try and change things in the law, in the code, which even though they may intend to do something great and wonderful, they push forward the wheel which crushes the independent man or the independent woman, because they create more and more greater bureaucracy until eventually there's no way to get through it without being crushed by it. There's no way to get out of the way. And they may just be a little thing. It may be a wonderful thing. Like, we're gonna do this thing because it's going to help this specific section of handicapped individuals, or we're going to do this thing over here because it's going to help underprivileged kids, or we're going to do this thing over here because it's going to help make sugar cheaper, so we're going to help this industry so so all these other people can benefit from. And all these little things, they're like tentacles, you know, they go through the economy and they just kind of grasp a hold of it. And eventually the freedom that you had, the liberty, is stripped away from you. Your choices are removed.
Right.
And we don't see it because it happens so incrementally, so slowly, for the most part, over time. I mean, we all get upset about the health care bill and what's going on back in Washington, D.C., because we can see how it may directly affect our lives today. But what about the 9,999 other pieces of legislation that Washington, D.C. considered over this last year? I mean, I don't know that that's the exact number, but you know, it was what, 2006 when they first hit 10,000 pieces of legislation in a year. So what about all those? What do? They're not benign. No. They all have a consequence, and combined, they have, you know, they're this compounding effect against your liberty and independence, your ability to be a sovereign.
Well, I like how you talk about the little creeping effect, or it starts really small. Jefferson said that false is the idea of utility that sacrifices 1,000 real advantages for one imaginary or trifling, there's the word, inconvenience, that would take fire from men because it burns, and water because one may drown in it, that has no remedy for evils except destruction. The laws that forbid the carrying of arms are laws of such a nature. They disarm those only who are neither inclined nor determined to commit crimes. And he goes on. So he says, can it be supposed that those who have the courage to violate the most sacred laws of humanity, the most important of the code, will respect the less important and arbitrary ones? So what he's saying is, you can create 1,000 laws that will rule out some inconvenience, some inequality, but what they become is like 1,000 I guess little razor blades that are cutting away at any semblance of freedom and liberty that we have. And before you know it, you're in a complete police state where we are today. Randall, I already said it twice. It's already happened. Marx is rolling in his grave with glee because he knows Engels, all of them, they've got to be so proud that we are where we're at. I mean, just because you can surveil the people, should you do that? I mean, everything we search, everything we see, everything we say, they can track. They track our facial recognition. I mean, you think that this is just social so that we're all connected. Mark Zuckerberg's not the good guy that maybe he was once, or simple. We're tracked. So a complete police state. And so if you think that power doesn't intoxicate those in control, and they want to continue to take away the liberty. Like in 1984, eventually Newspeak became the language. That's what ingsoc meant. It meant English socialism. Ingsoc was a new word, if you see that movie or read that book. So they recreate the language. They track everything you do, see everything you do. And before long, you have a complete totalitarian state. And the crazy thing about this is, unlike the jackboot thugs in the movie, we've voluntarily given up our liberty. And I'm in that bucket with you. So it's really hard, Randall, to know, and maybe you have an idea of how do we get out of this situation, even if we assert our freedom and our agency. Obviously, God and providence is involved, but like, how do we get out of this situation? How do we take down the intelligence agencies to sound revolutionary?
Well, so you want to commit a revolutionary act now that we've been talking about that original revolutionary act for this continent?
I think God expects it.
You know, you bring up 1984. I think I've brought this up before. I saw this, just this graphic recently that talked about the fact that maybe 1984, George Orwell wasn't right, but maybe A Brave New World was more right. Because here we have all this social media, we have all this decadence, and you know, we're willing to say, instead of 1984 that forced everything on it, and they forced cameras in every room, and they forced all this stuff there, in A Brave New World, it was all done with drugs, right? We give soma, so we give people soma, and it makes them, even one point in time when there was a riot that was caused because someone tried, the guy, I can't remember his name, anyway, that came from the reservation, he was trying to get rid of the Soma ration for this working class, and they all rioted. So what did the riot police do? They came in with some spray guns that sprayed liquid Soma, and everybody was calmed down and they were taken care of. And I think, you know, I kind of feel like social media has kind of become that for the people. You know, it's the outlet. We feel like we're connected, but we're connected in the least connected way possible. I was kind of thinking about it today. You know, when you talk about a connection, I work in the IT world, so if I make a connection in a network, I physically plug a network jack into a network socket and it connects, right? There's a physical touch. If I connect power into the wall, I physically have to push the plug into the wall and it connects. When we get on social media and make a connection, we don't physically do jack crap. We just sit here and we're like, oh, we're connected now. We don't have any real interactions with these people. We just follow everything. I mean, it's almost as if we can make a connect. Yeah, we can make a connection by just taking the two, you know, the plug and the socket, and just putting them within proximity to one another and say, hey, look at the other one, make a connection. Isn't this great? It doesn't happen. Socially, we aren't connected. We're our least. I think we're the least connected we've been in centuries.
Animated GIF. Yeah. I'm just inserting.
We have lots non-connection. We have lots and lots of information, and that may be great, but it's like overload. So we don't end up really interacting with other individuals. We don't go to the Capitol Hill when there's a problem, because we don't know that there's a problem up there. Maybe someone posted on social media, so we signed the petition, which isn't doing anything, or we liked the post, but we're not going to Capitol Hill or to the city council meeting to say, hey, this is a problem, or yes, I want this to happen. We're too busy connecting. Right. And in the end, we're being completely ineffective at probably anything. I would really like to see the amount of causes or movements that have truly been pushed forward and made a real difference through social media.
There's been a few.
That's why I said I'd like to see the number, because I'm sure there have been a few, but the number I'm sure is not anywhere near the number that started. I mean, here you are, the number that actually happened, and the started ones are way off the chart.
Groups and causes.
Yeah. Oh, join the healthcare for, you know, whatever people group. Okay, yeah, I'm a part of the group. Well, it's not going to do anything.
Obama is a Muslim. Yeah.
Like, what? You know, it's like, what's going on with us as a people? We can't even start to try and comprehend the idea of liberty or independence, because we're so bogged down with our intoxicating liking drugs. We spend all day and we think, oh, look at all the good I'm doing. I'm liking all these people and things. I must be a really progressive, wonderful individual that just gets along with everybody, except everything. Sorry.
How many likes did I get? Dopamine, like
That's
Soma.
Right.
So I'm a Soma dopa. Anyway, well, Rando, you bring up a really good point about the Soma is a perfect, I guess it's another example of the scene in the Matrix when the guy's eating the steak, he betrays the humans in Zion, anyway, the little Neo group. He betrays them, and it's that he even knows this is fake. Tastes amazing though, and I want to have all these things hooked, set me up with this. And then I thought, oh, the program's just going to wipe him out, send him down the toilet, kill him. So I just thought, what a dumb trade you'd make with a program like that. But the Soma is the same thing. The other thing, too, I said that it's our duty to God to stand up against tyrants. I remembered that Thomas Jefferson, John Adams, and Benjamin Franklin were tasked with coming up with a new seal for the country. Benjamin Franklin proposed the phrase, rebellion to tyrants is obedience to God. I'll say it again. Rebellion to tyrants is obedience to God. So they knew right out there, that's your fatherly figure who's got gout so bad they got to carry him into the hot hall in Philadelphia to get the Constitution done. But he said, we have a duty to stand up against tyrants, and that's just the way it is. And the founders knew that. You give up your treasure, your blood, your freedom, your life, whatever it is. You just do it.
And the other thing right there,
so that's important to note,
is the fact that he wanted that as a motto or on the seal, indicated that he wanted people to realize that just because we've gotten rid of one tyrant doesn't mean that we can't inherit a new one or can't elect a new one. Tyrants are a dime a dozen. They're all out there. They're all seeking for power, and they'll all find a different level of power. But do we have the ability and the strength of character as a people to stand up against a tyrant if they gain power in the United States? Or against the ones who do have power in the United States? I'm just saying.
Here's a good type. That's the word I was trying to think of with the psalm. As foreshadowing, or a principle is that when Moses faced Pharaoh, his staff, a snake, swallowed another snake. I've heard so many times in movies about terrorism, military, we must cut off the head of the snake to destroy the organization. Cut off the head of the snake. And I think there's always a new snake to swallow up that power vacuum that you cut off. I mean, did terrorism end when supposedly, I hate to doubt SEAL Team 6, but we never saw a body. We never saw anything of Osama bin Laden. We have to take the government's word for it. Bull. That's what I say. I say it's a big political theater. But anyway, the point is you kill off the head snake like Fidel Castro, there will be another one. Big deal. Like you said, there's always tyrants in the. It's like this giant snake pit, and there's always one ready to take the place of another. So I beat that dead snake to death. So the point is
that's why our the founders understood that.
What's the point, Randall?
The point is that they knew that. They knew that. They understood that. So they went and they created a constitution which was supposed to say, okay, we're not going to think that individuals are going to be benevolent, because we know they won't. When people get power, they go crazy. So we're going to create these 3 partitions of government that will check and balance one another, and it's going to be great. It's never been done before, but hopefully it will be sufficient to keep our liberty from being frustrated, to keep the nation together, and to keep, any one person from gaining ultimate power. And, it probably is the best system that's ever been devised, but those in power, they always seem to try and find some way around those types of protections. And
they can.
Yeah, and we let them.
As long as they're funded. You know what? We are Karl Marx's Engels. He funded Karl Marx, gave him $25,000, I think, at one point. He funded him, so Karl had prostitutes and all kinds of lavish living, and then he'd run out and be a bum, and Engels, he would ask him for money. So that's the thing. We are the government's, crack dealer. And it takes me back to what you were saying, Randall, about, Randall, I thought it was funny. I said, the point is, and then you came in with the answer that I was going to say, and I thought, have we been together that long we're finishing each other's thoughts and sentences? Because I think we have. We're like an old married couple. Wow, we're down with the times. Anyway, take that soundbite.
Boom.
Anyway, it says if angels, Federalist 51 says if angels were to govern men, neither external nor internal controls on government would be necessary. But in framing a government which is to be administered by men over men, the great difficulty lies in this. You must first enable the government to control the governed, and then in the next place oblige it to control itself. So like I said, we give the government the capacity to create the nooses that they put around our necks. So I have an answer to this. You want to know what it is?
Sure.
Okay, it's from this article called Free Markets Need Moral People. I always hear people dog on capitalism. But here's the thing. The author Daniel Lattier says, this disorders of the global market come about for the same reason as the disorders of the welfare state, because people seize every opportunity to externalize their costs, which means escape liability for wrong actions. They do this because there is no vigilant community which compels them to behave in any other way. There is no way forward for mankind that does not involve the restoration of that kind of vigilant community. And it can be restored only at the local level by rebuilding the forms of social membership. So I love that this author says there is no vigilant community. We hear liberty requires vigilance, eternal vigilance. So that means you basically need to kick your neighbors' butts at the local level and say, no, we're not going to have this tax to pay for a trail through our neighborhoods. If you want to have the trail, own it, buy the land, or partner up, raise money freely, have businesses donate, and then create a trail. That's a vigilant community. One example of 1,000.
Well,
Randall?
When you shared that quote, it made me think of this
Over
quote
to you, Randall.
from The Law by Frederick Bastiat, where he's talking about how, things are unequal. You may have one group in power and then another group wants power and they'll take over and whatnot. And he said, it's as if it were necessary before a reign of justice appears for everyone to suffer a cruel retribution, some for their evilness and some for their lack of understanding. In other words, saying that you'll have one individual in power and they'll impose their, dictates and their oppression. And then another group wants to come in because they're upset with this person. And so they go the opposite way and they have their own reign of terror. And it goes back and forth and back and forth. And that was the beauty, I think, of the founding fathers, one which, many today try and undercut or discount. But they, especially George Washington, saying, okay, we're going to set up this government and then we're going to step away from it. We're going to try and set, this reign of justice, this reign of liberty, not of men, but by a document that espouses the principles by which we should be governed, not by the character of charisma that we're going to find in any one leader just because the people love him. That I think set us up for reaching this point more than anyone else. Just that one act by George Washington, his ability to be able to say, you know what, I don't need this power. It's beyond what I need, and set up that reign of justice. Because how many other examples do we have? I mean, obviously Frederick Bastiat was talking about a French Revolution at the time. You'd have Robespierre would take over, and we need to kill all these people, and then someone else would take over and kill Robespierre, and blah, blah, blah,
he called it the Revolution of Virtue too.
Right,
virtue.
Right. But that's the thing, is it was this totally different look. It wasn't trying to bring in liberty and step away and try and not let power corrupt the individuals. It was this, which is, I think, more what we saw in the United States, although obviously it's not there anymore. But in these other countries, it was just like, oh, well, we're going to establish liberty, so now we've got a ruling class, and this ruling class is going to do what the heck it wants, and that's happened in a lot of other places. Where
the hypocrisy of those who are for the people, like the Stalins and Lenins who say equality and communism, world communism, the proletariat, be equal pay, equal rights, equal prosperity. Then they live in mansions.
Right.
And they starve 2 million Ukrainians.
Well, I was just thinking of one example, Uganda. When the British pulled out of Uganda after World War II, they left one group in charge, which was some of the more southern tribes, and they didn't and I can't remember their name offhand right now. I just remember the story after talking with a mutual friend of ours that went over there and did some charity work over there. Anyway, but the northern tribes were different, and they didn't like each other. They'd warred previously. When the British were there, they kind of equalized things because they wouldn't let one group war against the other. But then when they left this one tribe in charge, they immediately started to go to war with the northern tribes and oppress them and, belittle and destroy and really upset them. And for a long time, that area of Uganda was considered the worst place, the least safe place in the world. And so, I mean, there's just an example. And so they came to power, and immediately they try and impose on another group. What happened in Iraq, right? We pull out Saddam.
Right.
You know, he was obviously not a benevolent leader. He was oppressive here and there, but he was secular. And then all of a sudden, the U.S. puts in a government which is primarily one group, and they immediately start getting after other groups, other minority religions in the country. And it's like this happens over and over and over again. I mean, we could probably fill a book with examples, and maybe we should. Maybe that's our first book. Examples of why you can't just spread liberty by saying we're going to spread democracy. Democracy is not the key. Democracy is not the key. Virtue is the key, and not just virtue in the people as a whole, although that's necessary,
right,
but virtue in the leaders that get things going and the principles upon which it's founded. Because how many democracies have we tried to create, and how many of them have really, truly, ended up in a better place long term? And have really followed principles like we supposedly have here in the U.S.
Well, there have been quite a number where you might be able to categorize, like Greece and others, but they don't last long, and they are very fiery in their ending. There's a lot of hypocrisy, which you've helped to point out through Bastiat's quote about, the people who are subjugated and disenfranchised get some power, and then before you know it, they're living on the dole. I wanted to share something about this because one of the loudest groups about discrimination are the LGBTQIA and about 70 other genders, self-designated. And I wanted to share some quotes from them because they have howled loudest for the last decade or two, even 30, 40 years. So once the race thing was resolved by government in the 60s, then this became the gender movement. Ellen Page said, "This world would be a whole lot better if we just made an effort to be less horrible to one another." And author Ernest Gaines said, "Why is it that as a culture we are more comfortable seeing two men holding guns than holding hands?" And I'm going to tie this all together so it makes sense. The last one, though, is George Takei. He was the Asian fellow on the old Star Trek show.
Yeah. Some
funny posts, by the way. He's pretty hilarious. But he says, quote, "We should keep calm in the face of difference and live our lives in a state of inclusion and wonder at the diversity of humanity." Okay, why did I share these quotes? Because there's a farmer in East Lansing, which is in Michigan, who has 120 acres. And it's called the, I can't remember the name of the orchard. Anyway, the Country Mill. Anyway, for 6 years, they've taken part in their local farmers market, but then they were asked not to take place. In fact, the city sent them a letter saying desist because on their Facebook page, they posted their beliefs that they support traditional marriage. Now, the point is, when we want liberty, we howl about inequality and unfairness. But when we get it, the immediate response is that we go to our city or state government and we make anti-discrimination laws which subject those who we have said subject us to tyranny or to slavery or to whatever. We subject them to the same thing. It is a vast hypocrisy that is so rank and so obvious that it's pretty scary now where the so-called left is going with these things with their sexual orientation and anti-discrimination laws. So I just wanted to throw that in, is that if you say you want freedom, equality, and liberty, that only exists free of government. Now, government can protect the conditions, meaning if someone hurts another person, prosecute them, but they can't create laws that create true liberty. It's not possible.
No, it's this belief that we then are creating liberty versus liberty existing and us living within it and being individuals of liberty. And so, I mean, I think instances like this are kind of interesting because we've really gone full circle from the point where there may have been actual harms that were happening maybe back in the civil rights movement and whatever else for individuals who may have been actually physically harmed, beaten, abused, whatever, or forced into specific areas versus, this guy's got.
And we have empathy for those people. As Christians, we care. I have family members who are gay, and I would defend them to the death. It doesn't matter. You have empathy for people that are abused.
Yeah, but being abused is a lot different than someone who just said, you know what, I don't agree with you, and I don't agree with what you're doing, so I don't want to do something with you on my property. Like the article that you had shared with me about this is basically saying that he won't host same-sex weddings in his orchard.
Right.
Well, isn't that his property? Does he have the right to life, liberty, and property, or the pursuit of happiness? And if he does he have the right to use that property? And this has been a debate that's been happening for a while. I mean, you had the same thing like the individual who didn't make a cake, right? Well, Rosa Parks not sitting at the back.
It's been tons.
Yeah, Rosa Parks not sitting or being forced to sit in the back of the bus, or a whole segment of society being forced to sit in the back of the bus.
By government?
Yeah, by government is a whole lot different than an individual saying, you know what, I don't want to make a cake for you. And so the government would then force someone to make a cake for another individual. I think this debate is just silly. That someone wants to say, okay, I feel like my rights are infringed because I'm LGBT or whatever, right? So if somebody says they don't want to make a cake for me, I need to go and prosecute them according to the law. That's just stupid. There are a million other people who would make a cake for that person, and that's as much bigotry as the other way. You know what? Well, and that's part of the messiness. That's part of the messiness of living in a free society, is that bigotry exists. It does. We cannot expect
freedom of speech.
Exactly. We will take on the one side and we will defend it to the death. But as soon as it touches one little thing that's not politically correct at this point in time in history, then all of a sudden that form of bigotry becomes something that nobody can engage in. But it happens.
Right.
And people have the right to be bigots, even if you don't agree with them. You know what? I don't think someone should be a bigot, but people are. And you can't send someone to jail because they're an idiot. It just doesn't happen.
Right. Well, yeah, I've often heard stupidity should be outlawed, and I'm like, no, it's sacred. And then I'm like, I just said stupidity is sacred.
Stupidity is sacred.
I mean, bigotry, racism, discrimination, these are human rights. They're inalienable. The right, freedom of association, of speech, of commerce, of anything, any rights comes into that. And Randall, you made me think, okay, the cake example, actually there are tons of these examples, bakeries and otherwise. I just came across another one the other day, but he's suing he's taking this cake maker. He would create cakes for gay people, but he wouldn't do it for gay marriages. That's it. He's created cupcakes and cakes for, I think that's the story. And even his workers and his spouse said he will actually create it for gay people. He just won't do the marriage thing because he says that's a covenant, sacred thing with God. So he's suing, and it's gone to the U.S. Supreme Court. Another thing I read was that a couple of people went into a Florida bakery with a gay owner and asked them to make a cake that says, I do not support gay marriage. And the owner wouldn't do it. And I thought, I would sue. I would sue to make a point. It sucks to be. Now, let's go back to that farmer and this.
Right, his orchard.
Man, I'm burning out. Country Mill, yes, and the farmer's market. So here's what happened. East Lansing, the city, sent TENS a letter denying Country Mill the application to be a vendor at the 2017 farmer's market. So government controlling a farmer's market Hey, you hypocrites, think of that. Now it says, quote, in the letter, it is brought to our attention that Country Mill's general business practices do not comply with our feelings. No, that's not what it said. East Lansing civil rights ordinances and public policy against discrimination as set forth in Chapter 22 of the City Code and outlined in the 2017 Market Vendor Guidelines. So we have civil rights ordinances, public policy, we have Chapter 22 of the City Code, and vendor guidelines for 2017's farmers market. So you have 3 or 4 ways that the stupid East Lansing, I got to be nice. No, it's stupid. East Lansing, Michigan's city council is infringing on people's liberties. I'm so glad that this family is suing under the First Amendment concerns. So they've filed a complaint. And so what this says is, hey, you want to be hypocrites? We're going to use the law against you too.
So what's going to happen, this will go all the way to the Supreme Court, potentially, and then it will be enforcement of the First Amendment by way of the 14th Amendment. We've seen that before.
Worst. Second Amendment, they did the same thing, the Supreme Court. For Chicago handgun ban, or for DC.
So
DC.
that, and we don't have time to go down this rabbit hole, but we're starting because there's another good question. Does the city have the rights, as a city group? I mean, I would say they do here in Utah. I'm not exactly sure how the state is set up there in Michigan, but do they have the ability to set up an ordinance like that and enforce it? Should the 14th Amendment be applied just like that, like we talked about with gun laws in Chicago?
Absolutely not.
Should the Supreme Court have the final say in this? I mean, ultimately, I would say no.
No. This is not an interstate commerce issue.
No, this
issues between states. This is a local issue where a city council has got their heads in cones.
Yeah, this should be something where they have a petition or they run their own city councilman or whatever for election and they get it overruled. That should be the proper role, because the federal government, this will only go to further entrench the federal government as a source of power over local communities and municipalities. So it's like for every step that you may see being a step forward, you need to look at the other angle, because it could just be a step backward, which is what I think this is.
It's a double-edged sword.
Obviously, I don't agree with them abridging their rights to be a part of the farmers market. But
I don't even care what your beliefs are.
I know,
just don't use force of government on me.
Who cares whether this squash is LBGTQ or whatever? I don't care. It doesn't matter. It's a stinking farmer's market.
It's pink.
Yeah.
Who cares?
Pink or blue or purple. I don't give a crap.
I am not a fruitist.
No, I'm not a fruitarian or a vegetarian or any of those. Anyway, it's just like it's like, don't go down that rabbit hole. And the people that are trying to do this and try and force their beliefs or rights on other people they're just creating different rabbit holes to have their own rights abridged from them too. It's like it's this never-ending problem. Dude, let's just get back to liberty. Let's get back to liberty.
I'm going to actually post on County Mill's page on Facebook what they ought to do at the next city council meeting in East Lansing. All of the liberty lovers, straight, gay, religious, non-atheist, I don't care. Get in there, pack that room, bring the media, and take kazoos. And then when the city council men and women and the mayor come in, play that song from Star Wars. Because they're being tyrants. It's like the Empire. You will not sell produce.
We're out of time, Thomas.
I will squeeze your produce.
Thank you for joining us tonight. We've had a good time talking about liberty. We hope you'll join us again. Like us on Facebook. Subscribe on YouTube. We appreciate your patronage.
Peace out. Keep playing that kazoo of liberty.
Amen, brother. Amen.